Saint Oscar Romero was the Bishop of El Salvador who died as a martyr in 1980. He was a shy, academic man who was thought to be a fairly safe option as bishop for this small, fragile, unstable Central American nation. As such, he was thought to be someone who would not make waves because he wasn't radical, he was not revolutionary. And these were difficult times for El Salvador. In the mid-20th century, virtually all the land of El Salvador was owned by just a handful of families. And these ruling families and the military government and the courts and the police were effectively all one and the same. And so the vast majority of people were very poor, mostly working as peasant farmers, day labourers on land that they would never be able to own for themselves. But over time, in the 60s and 70s, as throughout so much of the world, movements began to emerge for asking for justice, asking for fairness, as workers began to form collectives and ask for better wages and for human rights and better conditions. Students did so in the cities as well, and the government simply clamped down. The military government formed what were then called as death squads, who would simply disappear people. An awful euphemism for tens of thousands of people over those decades. And Oscar Romero, as bishop, tried to just kind of not get involved in the struggle. Many of the priests and religious in the countryside were actively staying with the people in what became known as the liberation theology movement, a way of understanding God in the midst of the struggle of the poor. But Bishop Oscar Romero tried not to get involved, tried to simply keep the peace. This was until one of his own priests, a very holy man called Retiro Grande, was also killed by the government. And this just seemed to activate him, because he said, if this is what they are doing to our priests, who are public and who are respected, then what on earth are they doing? What more are they doing to our poor campesinos, our people, the poor who go unnoticed out in the countrysides and the hillsides? And this simply became the turning point for his life. He was radicalized by this, and then he began to now strongly speak out for the poor with his people and against the government. He began giving speeches, even over radio, appealing to the young soldiers, who were at least mostly nominally Catholic, saying, do not kill, do not harm your own people. You do not have to obey the unjust commands of your commanding officers. And in doing so, he became the champion of the people. He was celebrated by the poor throughout the nation. But of course, that made him the next target for the government themselves. I did a month-long course on Oscar Romero some years ago, and it was an intensive course where we all learnt about Oscar Romero's spirituality, his life and his teachings and his legacy. And I, like everyone in the course, we simply fell in love with him. An amazing, extraordinary man. And on the last day of the course, our teacher sat us down in a circle to do a little bit of a closing ritual in which he told us the story of his martyrdom. Very soon after one of Romero's speeches appealing to the soldiers against the government, he was celebrating Mass in the chapel of a hospital in San Salvador when a man in a red car drove up, walked in the door, shot Romero twice in the heart, and then sped off and was never found or convicted. And despite attempts to save him, Oscar Romero bled out on the floor of the chapel. And as nuns who worked in the hospital began mopping up the blood with hospital bed sheets, they took the sheets down to the laundry to be washed. But the Mother Superior said, no, don't do that, don't wash these. His blood is precious. She'd recognized already that this was a holy man who was going to be a saint, and whose legacy would extend far beyond his lifetime and far beyond El Salvador. And indeed, she was absolutely right. Romero's funeral, which attracted more than 250,000 people, became the movement which began the downfall of the El Salvadoran government and had influence throughout all of Central and South America. So as we began the prayer time to close our course on Bishop Romero, the teacher gave us a little card which had an icon of Romero on the front, and then we opened up the card. Inside was a piece of blood-stained cloth, a piece of the bed sheets which had mopped up Romero's blood as he lay there dying on that hospital floor. As he lay there, the blood that had come from the very last beat of his heart. And as we each very gently and reverently held that cloth and gently touched it, I and everyone was so incredibly moved to tears at the tangible connection to the very last heartbeat of this incredible man, this holy man who had died for his people and with his people at the hands of his own government. And that relic, that blood-stained cloth, that relic, is something I will always treasure simply holding even for a few moments. But this is what the Eucharist is for us. As we celebrate this Corpus Christi Sunday, we are celebrating what we have not of Oscar Romero, but of Jesus himself. That we have not just a blood-stained piece of cloth which we can hold for a moment and have to give back. We have the Eucharist, which is also the tangible connection to Jesus' last breath, to the very last beat of his heart on the cross, where Jesus gave himself to the Father on behalf of us, for us, and with us, as he too was killed by his own government. Jesus offered his life as a sacrifice, and he made that intention at the Last Supper, and in doing so, gave himself in and through the bread and the wine of the Last Supper, turning into the Eucharist, which we could share in. Both the disciples that night were able to receive his very presence into their bodies and souls, just as we can now. For us, the Eucharistic host that we hold in our hand, and please God, the Eucharistic blood we'll be able to drink again very soon from the chalice, is precious, like the blood-stained cloth that mopped up Romero's blood. So as we receive communion this day, I implore you, receive it reverently on your hand and hold it. Touch it. Look at it. Don't pinch it, don't grab it. Receive it gently as if it were the most precious diamond or ruby in the world that you would not want to fall off the palm of your hand. Cradle it for a moment and know that you hold in your hand the tangible connection to the moment of Jesus' death, of his sacrifice for you. But not just to the moment of his death, but also the connection to where Jesus is right now and who he is right now, the resurrected Son of God in heaven, who continually pleads for us, who intercedes for us with the Father in this very moment. That is who we receive in the Eucharist. So that is who we celebrate this Corpus Christi Sunday. Let us receive our Lord Jesus with reverence and love, connected to his life, to his death, and his resurrection.